Welcome to Inside Opera, a periodic program of the Lyric Opera of Chicago, exploring the cutting-edge issues of opera and our time. I'm Sylvia Neil. I'm chair of the board of the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and today we will be addressing women, power, and opera with two guests who are the most powerful women in opera today, the most celebrated singer of our time, Renee Fleming, and the longtime chair of the Metropolitan Opera of New York, Ann Ziff. Welcome, Renee and Ann. I am so looking forward to our conversation today. I will be asking questions, and we also asked our audience for questions which were previously submitted and have been integrated into our questions today. Our virtual live audience is composed of Lyric subscribers and donors, and the program will be made available to all for general streaming on Lyric's YouTube page. So, Renee and Ann, welcome. Hello.
Thank you. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi there.
Your inspirational bios are posted on chat for our audience. Though due to your high profiles, folks know your professional personas very well. Renee, Lyric has had the privilege of getting to know you personally in your various leadership roles in our opera company for years, as well as your amazing superstar performances. And Ann, your superstar leadership in the opera world, as well as your artistry and jewelry, are also well known in Chicago. So let's start a bit more intimately. When you were children, did you like opera? Did any women inspire your life paths from when you were young?
Oh boy, you're asking the right people.
That's right. That's for sure.
Sure.
My mother was an opera singer and sang in Europe and with Toscanini and George Sell. And I grew up in Manhattan, so I grew up with opera and went the first time when I was about 7. So I've been inspired by it forever. When I was young, I don't remember who I particularly loved, but then it became Pavarotti and Leontine Price, like everyone else on the planet. And now it's the fabulous Renee Fleming.
Well, it's funny because it's just ironic that I learned how to sing in an apartment in the building that Ann grew up in. And
Wow.
my voice teacher was there, and they were family friends, which is how I met Ann long time ago when I was in Aspen. So my mother was a singer. Both my parents were singers, but they had chosen within having their families to have careers as teachers, as public school teachers in music. And so I was steeped in it as well, and I thought everybody sang. I thought, all families sang in the car, et cetera. Yeah. And so, and performed together. I think there was some talk of us being the the next Fun Trap family. Thank God that didn't happen. So the inspiration was there. I did not have, there was a budding, a burgeoning local opera scene there. We had a summer opera program. We had Rochester Opera Theater. There wasn't, I didn't have exposure to outside of my hometown. We never went to New York. For instance, I didn't go until I was auditioning for a program. So, but it was still, a rich childhood.
It's wonderful. That's really interesting. And it was interesting to know that your relationship went back that far as well, which is really quite wonderful. Yeah. And Renee, you're often called the people's diva. So how is a diva, which people identify opera with, different than women in opera having power? And what inspired you to take a leadership role beyond your incredible singing career?
Well, diva has a couple of different definitions. I mean, one, the original is this goddess on stage. And I think it was actually developed, it came about for Sarah Bernhardt, the actress in Paris. And it literally translates as goddess. So I like that definition a lot. That's a good one. It also has come to mean bad behavior. It's been synonymous with people throwing tantrums and being difficult backstage. And it's also left the classical music world and has gone into the pop world. I think there are even household products named diva. So it's got a much broader definition now. But the bad behavior has sort of stayed with us, in that people love to talk about it. It's good gossip. It's good for dinner parties. And then we hope, of course, most of all, that what happens when a singer gets on stage, a woman in particular, a soprano, and moves and inspires the audience, that's another great definition. But I became interested in behind the scenes because I was asked out of the blue. I was so busy, I wasn't looking for more things to do, but it was Dick Kippard who actually approached me and said, let's talk about, a larger role at Lyric Opera. And I immediately thought, wow, I would love that. I have so many ideas and so many convictions about the art form, and what a fabulous relationship it's been. I've so enjoyed my time working with Lyric Opera, on stage and off.
Yes, no, and the same, vice versa. I mean, it has been an incredible journey with you, and your creativity, and you continue in an artistry role, and looking forward to the productions you are producing. We're very proud of that relationship. So anyway, but it's 2021, speaking of the Lyric Opera, and appropriate for our topic today, I'm the first woman chair in all of Lyric's history. Although there have been strong women very identified with Lyric, we have a very dynamic general director by the name of Artist Kranick, who people identify Lyric with. But still, I mean, that's quite a long history to have as me being the first woman chair. And you are probably the foremost known board chair of opera in the world. And you've been 10 years as your tenure at the Met, which is actually the most powerful performing arts company, not just even speak of opera company in the world. So an audience member asked you specifically, how important is it for a woman to have a leadership role in opera? And does being a woman affect leadership? Do boards and staff leadership respond differently to women? Do board dynamics change when more women members are involved?
I think it's a little different at the Met because I happen to be the third woman chairman. Beverly Sills was chair for about 2 years. Chris Hunter was then chair, I think 5 or 6 years, and then I became chair. But it was interesting to note, I joined the board in 1993, and I felt like one of the few women on the board at that time. And now I would say we're at least 50-50 or more women than men. I think it's more difficult to recruit the men now than it is the women. And I haven't found it difficult to rule or manage as a woman. The Lincoln Center has a woman chairman, Catherine Farley, and the Natural History Museum has had a woman president for over 20 years. So I think perhaps in New York, it's been going on longer than in most places.
That's interesting you're saying, because we're seeing that change over now here, with Helen Zell at the CSO. Mm-hmm. And we now have Denise Gardner, who's going to be chairing the Art Institute of Chicago. We've had more women who've been chairs at the MCA, but this is beginning to be the trend as well. But you said something that's interesting, and maybe this is even controversial to ask. Do you think once women are chairs or more involved, in other words, the number of board members tip more toward women, do you think that's what makes men more reluctant to join?
I don't think so. I think it's maybe the men are getting busier and their wives are getting more powerful. And more women are running companies now. One of the things, Lyric has this, every one of our big boards has this, you have a financial requirement in order to be a board member. So a lot of us women, I got on because my husband was the big shot. They would have rather have him, but they got second best, which ended up working out anyway. But I think more women are in power and have the finances and the desire. I don't think it has anything to do with women being the chairs of these or presidents of these organizations.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I mean, I have since I'm Midwestern through and through, I use the term guys, and I say, the powerful guys are the women and as well as the men. There are a lot, and there are more and more women in their own right, whether they come out of the philanthropic background, but increasingly, as you say, the business background, even our investment chair is a woman these days, and our finance chair is a woman. How often would that have happened in the 1950s? So Renee, does being a female leader affect opera itself? An audience member asks you.
I don't know. I mean, I always thought I had the greatest job, because what's an opera without the soprano? You know, there are operas that don't have sopranos in them, but or where the soprano is not prominent, but there aren't many. Right. So I felt like it was quite an equal opportunity art form, because we need all these voice types, and we need them also in the chorus and in you know, in the orchestra now as well. I mean, there used to be all male orchestras, but not anymore. So I don't know. I mean, I suppose the creative side, where you're talking about directors and certainly scenic designers, et cetera, costume designers, that we're looking across the boards in every opera house and performing arts entity to create more diversity in all of our hiring. So, and that's not just a gender diversity, but it's also race diversity. And so that's really important. And I think everybody's very focused on that right now.
No, I think very, very, very much so. As a matter of fact, it seems that, and this is to both of you, the one area that seems stubbornly male is the role of music directors and conductors. And again, the audience, you know, really great questions. When will we see more men become more women on the podiums in major opera companies? And who are some of the women both of you admire the most behind the curtain or in the pit? And what can we do as leaders of opera companies to better nurture female leadership behind the curtain, backstage, as well as in the boardroom and in the administration? So that's a big question, but it follows up very much on what you were bringing.
I think we at the Met are trying to bring more women conductors and directors all the time. And I think they're getting much more prominence. Renee would know more than I do about the specific names and who they are. But my impression is that, and I'm on the LA Opera Board also, is that we're trying to increase the number of women, not only the number of, in terms of race, but in terms of females. I think we're trying to do that.
I mean, I just performed with Xian Zhang in New Jersey with the New Jersey Philharmonic, and she was phenomenal. So China, if you look at the telecasts of orchestral telecasts in China, it's a lot of women conductors, and
really interesting.
And there are parts of the world where there is no distinction really, and there are lots of people coming up who have power, and you know it's competitive. It's extremely competitive. But Maren Alsop would be the woman that I admire the most, and certainly in the U.S. because her career has been forged with the utmost, not just quality because of her conducting and her choices of repertoire, but she's been a real thought leader because she is commissioning new works all the time. I especially applaud the work that she's done in Baltimore with children and instrumental music. It's just extraordinary, the programming. And of course, now she's taking all of this to Vienna. And she also created a film with the World Economic Forum recently, which you should find online. It is so beautiful. It's called See Me, I think. It starts with Yo-Yo Ma playing on a beach in Massachusetts, and it's so beautifully done. So this is all her putting together these programs. So she's another one. She's a dynamo. And I'm sure there are more. There are a lot of up and coming conductors, women, who are infiltrating really, especially our regional orchestra system in a positive way.
Do you think it's affecting the nature of opera itself as a form of art?
Well, I think we need more opera conductors,
Right.
women. I'm not seeing it quite as much in opera. I don't know why. And there's certainly people who are capable. For instance, in the old days, you know, people came up as coaches, and they worked as pianists in opera houses, learned the repertoire, learned from the great conductors, and then they came up that way. And there are certainly tons of women doing those jobs who can and are starting to conduct.
I think another one that I really admire tremendously is Peter Gelb's wife, Carrie Lynn Wilson. And Peter purposely had not hired her at all for the Met. but Yannick has requested her, so she's coming to the Met in a couple of years to do one of the Russian operas. But she's conducting all over Europe and Russia all the time.
Oh, that's
Very-
great.
yes.
Oh, good.
That's exciting. That
Yeah.
is wonderful. You know, it is, we've been doing intense work at Lyric, just studying, as many have, in the area of, you know, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access. And indeed, sometimes it's, you know, easier to start your board moving in that direction. We've had great success and so on. But backstage is sometimes harder. And you know, indeed, in our performances in the upcoming next couple of years, as well as with our performers, we're rather proud, you know, at the number, which reflects not just our intent, but how many women are now being attracted and are feeling that they can do it. But, you know, stagehands, the people who are sometimes making things happen behind the scenes, encouraging young women to follow these type of paths. Are also interesting, breaking into new professions.
A great number of our stage directors and our stage managers at the Met are women, incredibly capable women, and they've been there a long time.
That's
True.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're wonderful.
Yeah, and so many directors now are women. It's true. There are many opera directors.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
and
creative.
we're proud to have the conductors, but as you said, there's fewer than one thinks, and that's an area that there's often discussions as well, how orchestras respond to women conductors as opposed to men
Right.
conductors, you know, in those roles.
True.
So actually I'm sorry.
No, it's true. I mean, I think everything comes from awareness, and there is definitely a tremendous growth in awareness about both the gender and racial equality in our art form. And so I think orchestras and orchestra unions can begin to think, you know, more positively about all of this.
Yes.
As really all of the administrations have to. It's got to be, you know, from top to bottom.
Right. Well, whether you're a general director, whether you're a conductor, whether you are the chair of the board, it's how people look at you as leaders. And in that way, how being a woman, if it affects how people, what we were talking about, respond to you, or what people are used to seeing. And it seems that the conductor is one of the last bastions of being harder to penetrate in orchestral performances as well as opera performances, obviously.
Well, and this is an art form. And if you look at our corporate world, it's still very much behind. We're so far behind in really having women be able to infiltrate boards and CEO top positions. And I mean, you know better than we do, but it is amazing to me. And some of it, of course, has to do with what kind of family pressures there are. But a lot of it too is just these changes take a tremendous amount of work and effort and diligence.
Mhm.
Opera idiosyncrasy, there's an idiosyncrasy with opera, probably used to be with musical theater as well, of certain types of stereotypes of women in the roles. Do you think that affects opera in general? And do you think with more and more women entering the creative side, you know, the librettos, the composers, and so on, do you think we're going to be seeing more and more of a change? And what does that mean in terms of how we even produce and perform some of our heritage pieces?
I hope so. I
Yeah.
mean, with new works in particular, there's no excuse for
Right.
anything not to be
Right.
modern and relevant, apropos how we're thinking now about women's roles in society. So I would hate to see these old stereotypes perpetuated. I hate to say it, but all my children's childhood, I kept seeing them in Disney. And
Yeah.
and not just but really traditional roles in families kind of underlined. And I thought, why are they doing this?
Well, some have suggested in things such as Cosi fan tutte and so on, and that we intervene and actually go in and change the roles. And I know, speaking with Anthony Freud, our wonderful general director, president, and CEO, he's done a great job picking people and working with people who can, I would say, very finely tune performances and libretto so that it really brings out the human elements of all, not so much, the disparaging elements. But what do you say to folks who want to cut these things out, completely because of the stereotypical portrayals?
We've seen this already
Yes.
in a lot of opera, Monostatos, people change lyrics basically
Right.
on a regular basis to make things more palatable to our modern sensibility, which I think is appropriate. Some people are suggesting they shouldn't be performed at all, or that we shouldn't perform certain operas if we don't have people who can inhabit the roles who represent the person they're playing. And so that's a really complicated question.
It's a real problem, as you know too, Sylvia, because you can't always cast an Asian person or a person of color in the role that they're supposed to be in. Opera has always gone for the greatest singer, the person that was most capable to do that role. And we're all trying to do that. Of course, we had to do it with Porgy and Bess because everyone on stage had to be an African American. But it's difficult to try to do that with the opera and getting the perfect voice for those roles.
Well, if we took out sexism in opera, in even classic theater, there'd be very little we could actually perform.
Right.
Women have been classically victims in opera. These are stories about, vengeance and lust and every really victimized position a woman could be in from beginning to end. So, it's very complicated to you have to look at I do think you have to look at composers in the art form if we have enough distance, from them in terms of their historic perspective, where they were, what was happening at the time. It can teach us about how things have changed and how they haven't changed. There's still a lot to learn. We still mine the ancient Greeks. We're not going to stop doing that, I don't think.
Hope not.
Yeah.
I sometimes think too, you were saying about the victims also evil. I often think that that Carmen was sometimes portrayed as her being evil in the old days, so to speak.
Right.
Now she's portrayed as powerful and liberated, just by the subtleties of how it's directed and performed, in terms of what our emotions are. And I'm hoping that we are going to be able to look into our operas in that way rather than succumb to throwing it just out the window because of the victimhood. But it's complicated, it really is.
Well, it is storytelling in the end, and that's valid no matter what period we're in. Well,
Speaking of this, how has the Metoo movement affected opera? Do you think that it is going to be a forever change in the culture of opera? Do you think that it went too far? Do you think it's been something that has been needed and welcome for a long time?
I think almost every movement goes too far when it starts and then it levels back. I think it's a necessary change. I think it's changed things in opera the same way it has in the business world culture. And I think things that people used to forgive in terms of suggestive behavior or what they would call inappropriate behavior now, people shrugged. I mean, all the time. I hope it's a permanent change, but I hope it levels off a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, now that a young singer can go into an opera house and the first day of rehearsals, they'll be spoken to or handed something that explains all of the guidelines and what you can do, what the ramifications are for behavior that is inappropriate, and what you can do about it. And I think that's fantastic. Because this was always about power. It was always about sort of someone wielding power over someone who had less power, and that absolutely has to stop. So it's a positive change as far as I'm concerned.
You look at an opera like La Boheme, and if there's no hugging and real romance in it, it takes too much away from the story. So I think we have to level off a little bit on what can be done or cannot be done on stage, because you need that in real drama. You have it in movies, you have it in theater.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, but it has to be, it's really, we're performing these characters, and it's entirely consensual. And in fact, women can participate as well as men in all of this. So and we're also talking about other gender issues. We want everybody to have a chance. We now have trans singers who are excellent.
Yes.
And so that's a wonderful thing. I know there's a dialogue now about sports, and I think it's a phenomenal opening up of opportunity for everyone.
On
individual terms.
Yeah, and I think that those lines and that you were drawing, like what's on the stage and then what's in a sense behind the stage, the power dynamics, I think particularly in artistic fields where there is so much real drama going on the stage, and how does that end and how do you stop it? But I think that's probably more of an excuse, because it does have to do with the power dynamics of, who gets what job, and, who can, perhaps call the power over the others. And I'll be very curious in another 10 years to see how we are. But Renee, as you've just brought up, that's the social justice issues about who gets to perform, what roles they're going to perform in then. But also, everything from, the George Floyd, we're at the first anniversary and so on. Mm-hmm. The social justice issues, IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity and access, which you were talking about, but also the pandemic too, has gripped the world for the last year and a half. And we've all been closed so much has been happening online and in other places. And this is a very open-ended question, but how do you think these overwhelming phenomena are going to affect, the future of opera? And, everywhere from, they're just big, but
we have a job that will oversee that, the answer to that question.
Well, there's really nothing much good about this pandemic, but one thing that it has done for our nightly streams at the Met, we have over something like 150,000 or more new names of people that are watching opera, and well over 40,000 new donors, just, very small donors, but these are names and people that have never been seeing opera before. So I hope it will have a lasting effect. And when opera's back on the stage all over the country and all over Europe, even though they've had a lot of performances in Europe during this time, I hope that makes a difference for us. Who knows?
Yeah, no, we've seen similar. I mean, the numbers for Lyric, are astounding, in the hundreds of thousands. And we also have brand new donors we've never seen. Brand new viewers, and we're talking about not just people who are flitting by, but are actually watching
so great.
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah.
And it also is leading us into probably a virtual world for opera, where things are going to be more produced for virtual broadcast as opposed to, just stand and sing and so on. And I think it seems to be opening up a whole other creative area for us as well, which is fascinating. And it's interesting, that we as women are sort of overseeing where this is going right now. And perhaps in some ways changing in ways that we could never have foreseen before.
Mm-hmm. I think the potential is tremendous. We're all desperate to be back in a shared space, experiencing something artistic. I mean, I was at one of the honors performances the other night and was just ecstatic, exhilarated. I mean, everybody was thrilled to be together.
It's true. When we did our season announcement and we were partnering with the Joffrey, I was lucky enough to be sitting in the box and having live performance, one beautiful aria, one beautiful dance. It was a thrill to be sitting in the opera house. So the pandemic, interestingly, bring us back specifically to women and women issues, have indicated how much more women have actually been affected by the pandemic in the sense of staying at home, certainly professionally. and affecting careers, not just with job loss, but ability to do jobs more than men. So you both have had thriving personal lives as well as professional lives, and you have this amazingly renowned jewelry business that people didn't know that. I tell them to go to your website. I'm going to do a plug. It's beautiful, beautiful. And Renee, you have brought up, you had children while you were performing and brought up children, and every woman, I mean, and I know that we get asked that, I think hopefully increasingly men will be too, but this is a huge issue. How did you and how do you balance work and life responsibilities?
Balance was the hardest thing, no question. The greatest challenge I faced as a singer. Worth it, 100% worth it. I'm so grateful to have had both. And my girls have turned out beautifully, thank goodness. So I do think, and I know many of my colleagues don't choose not to pursue family and career. So it's not easy.
What do you think is the biggest challenge of it?
I can tell you about Anne though. She is just.
I'm going to go to Anne. So we'll go back to that.
Dynamic. She could probably take on 10 more jobs and have no problems managing them all.
Oh, I love that you said that. Yes, I believe that.
Amazing.
But how do you manage your business and your business? I mean, running an opera company as a chairman is a full-time job in itself. Believe me, I know.
Well, it is, but my jewelry business is always run by a manager. I had a shop on Madison Avenue for 5 years and decided to put my salon on a floor in my apartment. So it really doesn't take that much time, and I just make the jewelry whenever I'm inspired. And we all have a free hour here and there to do that. So you can't, asking me the question is not at all like asking Renee, balancing a traveling career all over the world and raising 2 kids as fabulous and beautiful as I've ever met. I just love her daughters. And they're so well adjusted. And they always had the idea and knew that their mother put them first, which was not easy.
It's important, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is not easy. And that is such a wonderful compliment. I think I just have to go to this another question I had further down, but I just want to bring it up. Everyone's seeing you sitting together. They see this dynamic between you, but not everyone knows what good friends you are. You are incredibly dear friends as well as colleagues, and it always chokes me up to see it. It's a wonderful thing to know about it. You have homes near each other. Anne, I met you very briefly at the Grand Teton Music Festival in Jackson Hole when you came to see Renee have, as she called it, one of her virgin performances just a few years ago because you'd never been to Wyoming before.
Yeah. So, thrilled to still have a debut somewhere.
I have a debut, right? Exactly. You see. But so tell us a little bit about your friendship, how you got to know each other, and actually, in general, in the same way we just talked about this balance in lives, how difficult, and it seems to more extraordinarily fall on women. But how does friendship also help and enable leadership? I'd be curious if that has ever, been part in a way of your lives as women.
To feel supported, I
Yes.
think, in what we do. It's hard. I mean, and it's doubly hard to be a woman and have power, any kind of power, I think. So to have other women who have your back and that you can share experience with is incredibly important, I find.
Renee was, when my husband was alive, Renee was the person that I could always go hear sing or leave and be with. I basically spent all the time with my husband and helped him in his work and all that sort of thing. But if ever Renee was around, he said, "Oh, it's fine. You can go see Renee. You can go visit Renee." So that's been going
Accepted
on.
family member,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And I met Renee before Amelia was born. Her first child was born.
Oh,
So it's a long time.
Yeah.
no, that's wonderful. But Renee, you just said something that in a way, it could be like a subtitle underneath the session for today. and you're saying that it's twice as hard for women, to have power. So I can't let that just go. I want to hear more about that. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think it's true. I mean, in one way I was protected because, as I said, being the soprano kind of automatically put me in a good position, in good standing with the organizations I worked with. But if I walked into a meeting and wanted to sort of be in charge of my schedule or my future, it was a little bit harder. And part of that also was being an artist, I think. But for sure, once I became a consultant, and again, you're not, I see a fantastic leadership. I'm talking about people who are running the organizations like Deborah Rutter, of course, who I work closely with here at the Kennedy Center. I have enormous admiration for what she manages. Now there are 17 performance venues underneath one roof with the addition of the Reach. Certainly Deborah Borda, I hugely admire. I knew Artist Kranig a little bit, and she was formidable. Sarah Billinghurst is someone that we hugely admire, who had a lot of power in opera. And these women all have energy. They're not afraid of conflict, I would say, overall, and they have vision. They have real vision for the organizations they work for. So there just aren't a huge number of them. So we would do well to increase that.
Yeah.
There are a number of people in high positions of power at the Met, and I don't think I've ever noticed a difference of less respect for those women from the men at the Met. I think we have an unusual culture in that regard. I feel fortunate.
Yeah, no, I do too. I think when I heard you say that, I think it's related to this juggling act that women still have, although we see that, just to converse, to reverse a little bit, men certainly are taking more and more responsibility in the home than perhaps were true in our parents' generations and generations before.
True.
But one of the things that the pandemic brought out, it still hasn't equalized. And certainly, just like culture is so hard to change, sex roles are, hard to change, even though we are seeing gender being so proliferated in so many different ways, the freedom to do that. But it's still harder to be in a role that hasn't been something one has been doing.
I do think there's been a big shift in the next generation. I certainly, with my daughters, their partners, their friends, and their partners, I see much, much more equality and willingness to share all tasks in a great way. I don't know. I mean, that's a very small, subset of their generation, but it definitely gives me hope.
I agree.
I can't say I'm great on the technology side though, because both of our lights went out, and I went behind to try and plug them in and realized the plugs aren't here. So I have a long way to go there in some areas.
I agree with that. The other day I had trouble with my sound, and it was at a board meeting, and so I managed to get into my computer and fix it. And I said, this was probably the most important thing I've done during my tenure.
Yes.
I feel the most accomplished. It doesn't matter what other controversies, and on and so forth. Oh my gosh, So this is, just very open-ended, in terms of this question. But in a way, it's the most important question, for who we have on. I mean, what bold advice, and I'm using the word bold on purpose, would you give to women who aspire to leadership positions, not just in opera companies, but specifically in opera companies or just anywhere, so what in general, but what idiosyncratically is true in our field in terms of getting to the top?
Oh gosh.
Well, I would say you have to really love what you think you want to do, and you have to learn as much as you can about that and be capable. I think that sometimes with younger people too, and they have an idea, oh, I have to do that, and they don't really understand why they think they have to do it. They don't love it enough. They're not motivated enough, and they don't learn enough to be able to do it well. I see that whether it's opera or across the board.
You know, and I also think looking at biographies of great women is really helpful. I got to spend a couple of hours with Angela Merkel some years ago. It was a reception after commemoration of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I assumed 1,000 people would be there, but it was just me and Alina Garancha talking to her for an hour and a half. And really kind of hearing about her process. And some of it her husband actually shared with my husband, but basically she is the most prepared person in the room. And that's how she was dealing with Vladimir Putin, who is formidable. Her Russian, she said, was not on the level of his German, but she was extremely well prepared always. And she doesn't clearly feel like she had to kind of enter into this obvious one-upmanship or any of this. Sometimes women make the mistake of trying to be more men than men, being more aggressive, more tough. And in fact, it's just being good at what you do, having people respect you. I'm a big believer, and I learned over many, many years in hiring the right people, hiring people that share your sensibility and your values, so that you can get along over time without having, again, these daily conflicts. And learning how to manage is another thing. I think that comes a little bit harder to women.
Yes.
So, I think and hope this is all changing in the next generation. Would you agree with some of that?
Absolutely. And I had no idea how to manage anything when I first got together with my husband, and he told me to manage all the people on our properties that were working in the houses or the gardens. And he was always 2 steps behind me. So I knew if I fell, I'd be picked up immediately. But he just said, go do it. And I think, and I said, okay, I'm going to learn how to do it. But I think we have to do that with whatever it is that's being handed to us. Make sure, as Angela Merkel did, that you are really prepared, that you're not going to get a major question or an issue and not have any idea about it, whatever the field is.
Sylvia, what would your response to that? What would your bold advice be? Because you worked in business.
I think being bold, and in some ways overcoming, sometimes that feeling that you can't do it by just, even when you don't feel like it, being out there and being assertive and acting the part of the leader, and you are the leader. Sort of like people say, if you smile, you're going to start to feel happy. Because my parents were immigrants. I didn't live in a big city and go to the fanciest school. They were very educated and pushed us to do the best. So when you were talking, Anne, about your husband enabling you to do something, they truly gave us, the sense that we were supposed to succeed. But we didn't perhaps have the connections and privileges of some people. And I sometimes think those who have those connections and privileges don't make it as much as people who come from not. Although when you come from less, you don't know how to make the connections to make things happen. And I think that that's very hard. And I think it's even more hard for women because there's not the natural mentoring of other people in power. So, did you go to the right school? Were you put in, are you from the right socioeconomic background? I sometimes feel for people who are in, let's say, poor rural area, or the inner city, who have these talents and these aspirations, but don't know how to get there. So I would say at the end of the day, just to be bold, like being bold itself. Actually, that leads me to think of this other question that I had that was a really important question that I wanted to ask you, Renee, and this is to you too, Anne, but this is coming from, your very popular book, the inner voice, and the inner voice, the making of a singer. But you speak of confronting the challenges of stress and self-doubt. And I do sometimes think at least women admit to having more of these bouts of, having maybe more stress by things and self-doubt. And so do you think this is something that we as women are more susceptible to? You look like you're not sure you agree with me on that. Or are we just more honest about it? And in the same way, how do we deal with it so that it doesn't, I think, undermine our ability to be leaders? Because I find for myself, that's one of my biggest issues that would undermine, my sense of being bold and going forward. That idea of self-doubt.
Definitely felt, I really struggled with those issues for sure. I mean, I think we're innately more susceptible to rumination. And the thing that I think has been helpful to the young people that I know and to me as CBT, that this sort of labeling distorted thinking is incredibly important, and spending a few minutes with yourself to figure out, okay, what is causing me to have thoughts that I suspect are not necessarily realistic about, and negative, unusually negative. And so that's been the most helpful thing, that list of just, disordered thinking and how to root it out. But I watched the beginning of a documentary last night on Mike Tyson. Trust me, I'm not a boxing fan, but I was fascinated with one of the things they had to really work on with him was confidence and was self-doubt. And right in the beginning of his boxing talent and discovering that he had talent. And so I just sat there with my jaw on the ground. It was very interesting. So men suffer from this as well.
Yes, interesting.
And we see also men susceptible to sort of, if they have a background that isn't jiving with where they are now in terms of success, they'll have a success conflict. And that causes some of the behavior that brings them down, whether it's sexual impropriety or drugs or even suicide, unfortunately. So there are all kinds of ways in which being a leader, being successful can be hard for us.
Both my father and then Bill, and I met my late husband when I was 25, both kept drilling in me that you should stop worrying about whatever the issue is if you truly can't do anything about it. And that sounds like an easy thing to tell someone, but I really learned not to live with what I was ruminating about if I had no control over it. And my husband would drill that into me. And it's a hugely important lesson for me. So I don't live with much stress.
That's great.
Yeah, if I realize I'm getting stressed about something, I either try to do something about it, and if I can't.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's great.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm happy that you guys learned something about each other now after all these years. But I have to say, Renee, I feel more like you. I think you actually think, as you were speaking, Anne, that reminds me of my husband. He's just, much better. But my tendency toward rumination and also self-criticism, which doesn't mean putting oneself down sometimes. For me, sometimes looking at a situation with criticism is a way of figuring out how to solve problems. I sometimes tell the people I work with, I like the dialectics. So if I disagree or, I'm trying to find the answer, it's part of, even a pluralistic rumination in order to, get to the bottom. Although, Renee, when you said what you did, I feel like you said about being negative, you come across as so positive. I don't think I come across negative either, but it's sort of that ruminating of, and Anne, you sound like my husband, who gets an enormous amount of, and he tells me basically the same thing your husband told you, and you've been able to incorporate into your very self, which.
It took a while. I have to say it took a while, but
I also didn't want to, I had performance pressure was really hard on me over the years, and I didn't want to expose people close to me to whatever I was struggling with. So a lot of it was internal. So, and I do think I present a pretty positive face to the world, but that doesn't mean I'm not miserable on the inside. I think performing it's built into the word. Performing means you have to kind of, it's a yardstick, you're measured, you're going to be measured if you're performing. And that's always challenging for us. And it's
Doing a
probably
double.
true for leadership.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say. But you're doing it double because it's performing. But a leader is often also performing. You know,
Right.
you have to be in that role very much.
But we can make a mistake and correct ourselves, say, oh, excuse me, and we can have a sore voice. And and you certainly can't do that when you're singing and have to be perfect on stage. I could never be a performer, ever.
Oh my gosh, I tried that in high school. It was not a pretty sight. Although, you know, a couple of our children have done a little bit better, but it is a kind of a performance though. You know, when you're in front of people and having to lead people, and there's an inspirational part of that as well. And Renee, you're doing double duty. You know,
Yes.
you know.
People always ask me too when I'll do an event, say an important event that I'll perform for, and they'll say, "Isn't this the hardest thing?" Okay, putting the Super Bowl aside, that had its own special pressure, but they'll say, "Isn't this the hardest thing?" I said, "Nope, the hardest thing is singing on a major international opera stage. That is the hardest thing because of that expectation that we perceive from the audience and from ourselves."
Well, it is the most complicated and diverse in terms of all aspects of art, in terms of the need for virtually a perfect voice. I know that's probably a goal that is impossible, but we do think that that's what you have. And so it's not a surprise that it's the hardest. And anyway, I want to thank you both. You've both been extremely generous with your time, with yourselves. It's a privilege and an honor to know each of you. And I hope that through knowing you and your honesty and openness, others on this program who are listening and, you know, and watching today, which is our wonderful lyric patron group, you know, but it's going to be available for all who may want to be there. And so it's not just because you two are superstars, but it's also so important what you say and how you inspire others. I think we're really at an inflection point for women and what we are accomplishing in these generations. And we're sort of at our ages, right in the middle of where things, I think, are not only changing, but are also taking root in a way that it may never change, no matter how much things may, you know, flip back for a little while. And it's exciting to hear about it in your lives as well as in opera. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining.
Beautiful job.
Thank you.
All right. I'm glad you're doing this.
Thank you.
Bye.